Now, I love the light. You can't see it on the video, but or on the live streaming, but they've got a sign that says "on air" that lights up to let me know that I'm on the air. So I don't get caught off wares or doing something I shouldn't be doing or accidentally doing. One thing I forgot again. I have a upper dental that makes me lisp, and so I have to take it out when I'm reading. We're going on with our discussion. In Ezekiel, we're in chapter 22, verse 1. And basically, in my Bible, it has this heading, Israel's shedding of blood. So the sermon today, or the study today, is shedding of blood. And it's Israel's shedding of blood. Moreover, verse 1, Yahweh's word came to me saying, You, son of man, will you judge? Will you judge the bloody city? Sounds British, doesn't it? Cursing. Then cause her to know all of her abominations. He's continuing to outline the abomination as to why they went into captivity. The commentary is now, You, son of man, will you judge? Will you judge the bloody city? Or, as some say, city of bloods, the city of Jerusalem, in which was shed the blood of the prophets sent unto her. The doubling of the word denotes the vehemency with which it was expressed. Will you plead for and excuse such a city as this? Surely no. So some, or wilt you do the work and office as a prophet? Have you the courage enough to do it? Will you rebuke and reprove? As the Targum, or the commentary, will you examine her case, judge truly, and condemn her as you ought to do? Have you an inclination to take this affair in hand? Then be directed to it as follows. I forgot to do something with this. I normally do when I'm editing this. I forgot to take out the these and the thous, and I'm having a problem remembering which one is which. Yes, you shall show her all of her abominations. Lay them before her. Convict her of them. Show her the evil of them and the punishment they deserve, every kind of sin she was guilty of. For as for particular acts, it was impossible to reckon them. Those sins that were the most flagrant and most frequently committed, and which were abominable to Yahweh, and rendered her so in his sight, or intended. It goes on in verse 3 of Ezekiel 22. You shall say, Thus says Adonai Yahweh. One of the things here is, yours will say Lord God. Okay? But that's actually Adonai Yahweh. And for some reason, this is where it really becomes prominently used is here in Ezekiel. Adonai Yahweh, a city that sheds blood within herself, that her time may come, and that makes idols against herself to defile her. Commentary, you shall say, Thus says Adonai Yahweh, for though the prophet was to sit as judge, yet in the name of the King of Kings, under whose authority he acted, the city sheds blood in the midst of it, openly and impotently, in the face of all, and in great abundance, even innocent blood, as the Targum has it. Murders were frequent and common, either through quarrels or through unrighteous judgments in courts of judicature, that her time may come to fill up the measure of her iniquity and to receive the just punishment of her sins. So the Targum states, the time of her destruction, and makes idols against herself to defile herself, being guilty not only of murder, but of idolatry. She was an idol maker and an idol worshiper, and which was against herself as well as against Elohim, to her own ruin and destruction, as well as to his dishonor. And it was no wonder she should be defiled with such what they call dunghill gods, as these were, as the word used signifies. That's what the word that's in your book here. The Targum renders it in the midst of her, and one of the writers says, interprets it by her or above her upon the mountains and hills. That's where they did all their idol worship, was on the mountains and the hills around Jerusalem. Ezekiel 22, verse 4. You have become guilty in your blood that you have shed, and are defiled in your idols which you have made. You have caused your days to draw near, and have come even to your years. Therefore I have made you a reproach to the nations, and a mocking to all the countries. You have become guilty, this is a commentary, in your blood that you have shed. Not only she contracted guilt by the innocent blood she shed, but she was tried and found guilty. Her guilt was notorious, plain, and evident, as well as exceedingly great and much aggravated. And you are defiled in your idols which you have made. She not only made them, in doing which she sinned, but polluted herself with them by worshiping them. Her mind and conscience were defiled with them, and which brought such a stain and pollution as could not be removed by anything that she could do. There are both pollution and guilt in sin, and neither can be removed but by the blood of the Messiah, and unless removed that way, punishment must follow. Well, you got to realize this is a time frame before Messiah, so there was no way of removing it. Therefore have I made you a reproach unto the heathen, and a mocking to all countries, who, instead of praising them for their idolatry, would deride them for leaving the Elohim of their fathers, which they did not, and assault them over them in their affliction and distress, though they joined with them in idolatrous practice. They were making fun of them. They were making fun of the Israelites because not only had they left the Elohim that had brought them out of Egypt, had given them this land, but they were also worshiping their gods, their Elohim. And, it was, the people couldn't understand, well, why are you worshiping ours? Isn't yours good enough? So basically they were bringing reproach upon Yahweh. Verse 5, those who are near and those who are far from you will mock you, you infamous one, full of tumult. The neighboring nations, in a commentary, as the Edomites, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and distant ones, as the Babylonians, Medes, and Persians, all either heard of or see their misery, shall rejoice at it and triumph over them. You look at the world today, even give you an idea. This is just kind of to give you an idea of what's being talked about here. You look at how the world is looking at the United States right now. I mean, we're the laughing stock of the world. They're making fun of our president, which I understand. But, the problem is, he doesn't receive the respect that he would have. He doesn't receive the same respect as the previous president did. So they now push, pull, and do everything good. The Saudis have decided that we don't need gas or oil. So they've cut it back. We haven't seen the effect of it yet because they keep hiding the fact that we're not got enough oil coming into the country by taking it out of our reserves. They're about got it emptied. And when that happens, well, you should know no later than the first of the year what the situation is with diesel. I mean, it is critical, because basically diesel runs every necessary vehicle or boat or barge that's moving stuff about this country and the world, really. Ships, everything.
Called food.
Yeah, it's called food. So I mean, it's running out because they're not making enough of it. Oh, yesterday there was another fire at a Chevron refinery, which is close to the refinery.
You're kidding.
Nope.
No.
Another one yesterday. The okay. It says here, which are infamous and much vexed, or they shall say, O you of an infamous name and character, who has defiled your name, got a blot upon it, and lost your credit by your conduct and behavior. And now, fretting and vexing under the afflictions and calamities that lie upon you, or those tumults are many as the Targum, who has been full of noise and factions and tumults, you are now come to a righteous end. Well, think about the noise and tumult that's going on in this country right now. That is, if you've been following anything to do with the elections that just took place, there's a lot of noise and tumult. And there's going to be more. Verse 6, Behold, the princes of Israel, every one according to his power, have been in you to shed blood, meaning been in Jerusalem to shed blood. Those that belong to the royal family, this is commentary, or the nobles of the land, or the members of the grand Sanhedrin of the nation. Everyone exerted himself to the utmost, according to his ability to shed blood, or to cause it to be shed. Everyone strove, as it were, who should shed most, to exceed each other in this abominable sin. He's laying out all the reasons why they were in exile, all the reasons why they went into exile, and also still telling to the people that are left behind why this happened. Because, see, basically they had become to the point where they got away with it, then it was all right to do it. And we're not talking about the little man. We're talking about the leaders of the country, both religious and secular. Verse 7, In you have they treated father and mother with contempt. Among you they have oppressed the foreigner. In you they, come on here, get it turned loose, have wronged the fatherless and widow. What does he mean by that? What's he talking about here? What is this? They have treated father and mother with contempt. What about the commandment that says, honor thy father and thy mother? Among you, they oppress the foreigner. What does Yahweh say? You're to treat the foreigner the same as the guy standing next to you. And then have wronged the fatherless and the widow, because they were stealing the houses of the widows. They were not taking care of the fatherless that were required. In you they have set light by father and mother, through whom they received their being from Yahweh. They wouldn't have been here without a father and mother to start with, by whom they were brought into the world, brought up and educated, and to whom they owed great respect, honor, and obedience. But on the contrary, they wanted affection to their persons, showed great respect to their commands, and treated them with irreverence and contempt, a sin of a very heinous nature, of the first magnitude, reckoned upon the very heathens as next to contempt of Yahweh, and disobedience to him is directly contrary to a law of Yahweh, and threatened with a curse and severe punishment. You can find that in Exodus 20, verse 12. In the Ten Commandments. By the connection of the words with the preceding, the princes of Israel seem intended, the children of the nobles and the sons and daughters of the king, who might have been thought by character they bore, the nation they were in, and the politeness of their education, would have behaved in another manner. And if this sin prevailed among them, no doubt it did among those of a lower class who are always influenced by such examples. Social media, what they call influencers. When you talk about people either through their social status, their political status, their wealth status, influence and get people to follow them. Oh, you got to follow them. And it's terrible if you get cut out of their list. So it goes on here in the commentary. In the midst of you have they dealt by oppression with the stranger, the proselyte, as the Septuagint says, him that was converted to me, as a Syriac version, which is an aggravation of the sin, that it was not merely a stranger that came about civil business, but one who came from foreign parts to worship Yahweh at Jerusalem, as the Ethiopian eunuch that we had read about during the study. To oppress such a one, either by private frauds or by injustice in a court of judicature, to exact upon him for food or lodging, or circumvent and overreach him in a trade or in commerce, or distress him by vexatious lawsuits. Boy, we got that now, don't we? Everybody sues everybody. I love it when they sue somebody and get a judgment that I don't care who they were, they could never pay it. Because it's got an intent. The judgment is not what they were after. What they're after is to shut the person up. They couldn't any other way. They think they have now, but it may not happen as they expect it to happen. When ignorant of the laws and customs of the country, at a distance from his friends, and in a want of money, must be a very great evil, and yet even the princes themselves in Jerusalem were guilty of it. That were weak, talking about the father and widow, that were weak and helpless and had none to protect him, father and husband being dead, when, according to their first rank and station as princes, they ought to have been the defenders of them, but instead of that, distressed, afflicted, and grieved them. You know, those that have power tend to do that. And one of the reasons I'm pointing this out is, look how close we are to what Israel was guilty of at that time. We claim to be a nation following after Yahweh. We don't use it. They don't use that name. They say God or Lord or whatever. But it's the Elohim of the Old Testament and the Elohim of the New Testament. They claim to follow this and proclaim all of these great things. But deep down, they're just as bad as the Israelites were when Yahweh sent them into captivity. So you think Yahweh look any more favorable upon this nation than he did on them? Verse 8. You have despised my holy things and have profaned my Sabbath. He comes back to that again. The holy place. That's what they despised, the holy place, the temple, and the worship of it. Remember, talking about them going down in the valley of Gehenna and offering their children through the fire, passing through the fire, and then going up to the temple of Yahweh and worshiping Yahweh. That's, to me, it seems like the people were just totally, had reached that point where they had no grasp on a reality. It says here, the holy place, the temple, and the worship it, holy persons, the priests that officiated there, holy sacrifices offered up by them, the holy word of Yahweh read and explained, and all holy ordinances were there administered. These words are directed to Jerusalem, the holy city, and to the inhabitants of it, who ought to have been holy men and women, and have profaned my Sabbath by doing their own work and neglecting the service of Yahweh, which was an inlet, as it usually is, to all manner of sin. Well, it says if you break one commandment, you break all of the commandments. They're all inclusive together. There's 10 of them. There are 10 instructions. All 10 apply. You know, it's like trying to put together an erector set and you leave out one of the steps or one of the pieces. It's the same way it applies to the Ten Commandments. Clark's commentary says, you have despised, instead of despised, all my ordinances are not only neglected, but treated with contempt, and my Sabbaths profaned. There is not only no power of righteousness among you, but there is no form of righteousness. What do people see? What do they observe? You speak one thing and you do another. Verse 9, slanderous men have been in you to shed blood. In you they have eaten on the mountains. They have committed lewdness among you. Sometimes you think of lewdness in one way, but it says here, innocent blood as the Targum, such who go from house to house, as peddlers do, with their wares and spices, as the word signifies. Hence, the Syriac version renders it merchants. Go ahead, Curtis.
Actually, there's a couple of verses out of Joshua 24 that's relevant to what we're reading here.
Okay.
Joshua 24, verses 14 and 15.
Joshua 24, verses 14 and 15. Go ahead.
Now, therefore, this is Joshua speaking to the nation of Israel. Now, therefore, fear Yahweh, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the mighty ones which your father, or the Elohim your fathers have served on the other side of the river in Egypt, but serve Yahweh. Verse 15, here's key. If it seems evil to you to serve Yahweh, like what you just spoke of a minute ago, last few verses. If it is evil to you to serve Yahweh, then choose for yourself whom you will serve, whether the ones from which your fathers served, which were on the other side of the river, or the ones of the Amorites, in whose land you now dwell. As for me and my household, we will serve Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. Well, it says, going on here in the commentary, it says, hence the Syriac version renders it merchants. And carry merchants and carry tales and lies of innocent persons, and stir up others against them to wrath and revenge, and shed their blood, or that go to the courts of judicature, meaning taking them to court, and there accuse innocent persons and bear false witness against them to the taking away of their lives. The Septuagint and Arabic versions render it thieves, who commonly are murderers, and in you they eat upon the mountains. They go worship on the mountains and eat to their idols. That is, there were such in Jerusalem who used to go to the mountains where idols were worshipped and eat the things that were sacrificed to them, or partake of the feast made to the honor of them. So the Targum says, in you they served idols on the mountains. In the midst of you they commit lewdness. Now this is what it says about lewdness. A general word for all manner of uncleanness, as adultery, fornication, incest, and some of the particulars that follow in the next verse. Ezekiel 22:10, in you have they uncovered their father's nakedness. In you they have humbled her who was unclean in her impurity. This is going against some of the statutes. They are guilty of the most abominable incest and unnatural lust. In you they have humbled. In their unholy and unnatural connections, they have not abstained from those set apart because of their infirmities. Now this is the English. The catalog of crimes that follow is too plain to require comment, is the way the commentary goes. Verse 11, one has committed abomination with his neighbor's wife, adultery. And another has lewdly defiled his daughter-in-law, again, adultery. Another in you has humbled his sister, his father's daughter, meaning he had sex with her. So, it's suddenly like the world today, nothing is off limits. And everybody just thinks it's the greatest thing on the face of the earth. Turn with me over to Leviticus 18:15. Here's what Yahweh had to say about it. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Or, as the commentary says, or have carnal knowledge of her, whether in the life or after the death of his son. Even then, marriage with her is not lawful. Means that my son's daughter or my son's wives, even if he dies, she's off limits to me to marry. Okay? His father's daughter. Okay? You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or born abroad. Meaning you don't get any, well, she was born abroad. That's okay. All these abominations they did on the mountains in worship to their idols. Verse 12. In you have they taken bribes to shed blood. You have taken interest and increase, and you have greedily gained of your neighbors by oppression, and have forgotten me, says Adonai Yahweh. Commentary says, innocent blood, as the Targum judges upon the bench, whose office is to take the part of the innocent and clear him from unjust charges, and protect him from the violence of wicked and unreasonable men, that lay things to his charge, which, if true, will require blood, meaning death. And yet men in such offices took bribes to bring the innocent guilty and pass sentence of death on him, which is a most shocking iniquity indeed. To take bribes in a pecuniary matters is very wicked, but to do it in cases which affect the life is most dreadful cruel. Or if it is to be understood of such persons who take bribes to bear false witness against a man, to the taking away of his life, it is very heinous and detestable sin. For as a set of jurymen bribed to bring in a wrong verdict, which would be equally a most enormous crime, such a custom to try causes to be determined by a jury did not obtain among the Judeans. To be determined by a jury did not obtain among. You have taken usury and increase, and you have greedily gained of your neighbors by extortion. Not content with moderate usury and increase, or even that were forbidden the Judeans among themselves, so greedy were they of gain at any rate that they extorted it of their neighbors in the most violent and oppressive manner. One of the commentaries says that by her friends, her neighbors, understands the Assyrians and the Egyptians, to whom she gave gifts, extorted by oppression from her own people to get help of them. In other words, they were taking money like we have today. Our government just gave how many trillions of dollars to Ukraine? Trillions of dollars when we have so much pain and agony here. Money that we don't have. Guess where they got the money? They got it from the, now I can't think of the word. Federal Reserve. And you know how they did it? You can go over here to Fort Worth. You know that just north of Fort Worth, there is a Federal Reserve printing plant, and you can go in there and take a tour of it and watch them running these pallets of $100 bills that they're just printing. Normally you would think that those $100 bills would be worth $100 of some product. They're just, paper. They're just a piece of paper. And as long as somebody will take it in exchange for something, people think it's worth something. And I've been in there and I've looked around, but they printed this out of nothing. Well, wait a minute. Somewhere somebody is going to have to cover that money, that printing, that paper. You are. That's why your taxes are what they are. your income taxes. The taxes on this and the taxes on that and the taxes on another thing, because they got to get the money some way. But one of the other main things here that the commentary makes is forgetfulness of Elohim is the cause of all sin. They forgot who Yahweh was. They got to the point that because Yahweh didn't drop the hammer on them every time they committed a sin, that, well, everything's okay. Everything must be okay. The people say it must be okay that the government did this. Well, they don't realize it until they have to pay the piper, as they say. Ezekiel 22:13, Behold, therefore I have struck my hand at your dishonest gain, which you have made, and at your blood, which has been within you. This is one of the things I find interesting. The Judeans, or the Jews, have 24 sins are recited by Ezekiel here in this book of Ezekiel. But the final sentence of punishment is for rapine and dishonest gain, which is the greatest of all. Rapine is the act of plundering, it's not raping, plundering, the seizing and carrying away of things by force. In other words, coming in onto your property and seizing your property and taking it away because you owe taxes on it or some other thing, which is the greatest evil of all. 1 Timothy 6:10, For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some have been led astray from the faith in their greed and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. People tend to think, I was hoping that I'd win that lottery this past week that was nearly $2 billion, even though you're only going to get not even $1 billion. That's their estimated value if they pay it out over 29 years, which means they get to play with the money for 29 years and hopefully make some money with it to be able to pay what they owe you. Great, but what's going to happen? What is it really going to happen? How much is your life going to change? How much would it improve? It's like today. If you could make twice the salary you're making today, what would it improve? Nothing. Because you would double your expenditures. It's been proven. The more money that people have, the more they spend. Well, if I'm making $250,000 a year, I can afford a $5 million house. I can make the payments on it. Somebody's trying to come through that wall. But does that mean that you really have a $5 million house? Because you're making monthly payments on it. And in most cases, you'll be making those monthly payments for the rest of your life. If it's not making the monthly payments on that, you're making the monthly payments on the insurance you're going to have to go with it, the taxes from the city, it's going to be added to it and increased every year. I'm trying to think of the other things. Because, see, I bought a house, I paid it off. Like, great, I paid it off. No, I didn't. Because by the time I got to that point, the insurance had gone up, the fire insurance, the taxes had gone up, and I was still making the same monthly payment as I was making before I paid it off. So, you have to look at it, because basically all you're doing is renting that property from the city or the state or wherever you're located. You never own it. Oh, you can sell it and make some profit off of it, yeah. But that's not always guaranteed either. He goes on here and says, can your heart endure? Or can your hands be strong in the days that I will deal with you? When Yahweh finally comes down to that point of saying you're going to now pay your penalty. I, Yahweh, have spoken it and will do it. When he speaks it, It's the same as if it just happened. It's already been carried out. That's what he's telling you is, I'm sorry, but now I'm going to carry it out. Can your heart endure or stand? Surely it must fall within you, become like water, and melt as wax, be it ever so hard and adamant. Or can your hands be strong in the days that I shall deal with you? Surely they must become weak, drop, and not be able to hold a weapon for defense. And if this would be the case, when Elohim should deal with the Judeans for their sins by sending the Chaldean army to besiege their city and take it, how will it be with sinners at the day of judgment and to all eternity? When the awful sentence shall be pronounced, go you cursed. When the wrath of Yahweh shall be poured out upon them, when they shall be cast into the lake of fire, where the worm dies not, and the fire is not quenched, this will be intolerable by the most stout-hearted sinner. No heart will be strong enough to stand up under it, or hands to keep it off. You know, you think about it. If you're standing before Yahweh and he says, I'm sorry, your sins are much too strong, how are you going to feel? You can't change anything at that point. You've either done what you need to do beforehand, or you go into that lake of fire and you cease to exist. People want to talk about, Yahweh is going to, torture you forever and ever in hell. Okay? No. I'm sorry, but Yahweh is much more, you should say, the word skips me. Huh?
Maybe benevolent in the fact that
He's benevolent because he's going to end it right there and it'll just be, you're gone, just like when you die. But this time you won't be resurrected. You're gone forever.
called second death.
Yeah. Because you think about it. What advantage does Yahweh have of tormenting you every day for eternity if you cannot repent? If you cannot be retrieved as such? And there's nothing that says that you can be retrieved. When you go in that lake of fire, that's the end of it. He has erased you from ever existing. He says, in the end of this, huh?
It's very merciful, actually.
Oh, yeah, very merciful. That was the word I was looking for.
Okay.
I, Yahweh, have spoken and will do it. He who is the mighty El, the eternal, unchangeable Yahweh, he has said it, that he will deal with impertinent or impenitent sinners in a way of wrath, and he will be as good as his word. He will certainly accomplish it. It is in vain for men to flatter themselves to the contrary of being able to escape it as such, or to put away the evil day far from them. It shall surely be. Because he says, the Targum says, I have decreed by my word, and I will establish or carry it out. Guaranteed. Verse 15, I will scatter you among the nations and disperse you through the countries. I will consume your filthiness out of it. Not only cause them to be carried captive to one place as Babylon, but to be scattered and dispersed throughout the various provinces of it, and in other nations as chaff is by the wind, signifying therefore the power by which it would be done, their weakness to stop it, who would be able to hinder it, and the uncomfortable condition they would be in, and will consume your filthiness out of you by destroying some filthy persons and reforming others. Because there's still some that can be reclaimed at that point when they went into captivity. And by seeing what all goes on around them, having to endure, people's attitudes are changed once they've been in captivity. And I'm talking about in a position where somebody else tells them when to get up, what to eat, and when to go to bed. When they lose that ability, that free will to do what they want to do, it changes people. It's like right now, there is a young lady, I'll use that term loosely, who is a basketball player. Very good female basketball player. She was playing on a team in Russia. Well, evidently she thought because she could play on that team that she could bring in one of these vape pens with real THC in it, real marijuana in it. They caught her at the border. Russia has no, I guess you'd say, mercy on those that bring drugs across the border. So as of yesterday, she was moved from, after losing her appeal, she was moved to a penal colony where she will be told to get up, when to get up, and she will work from basically dawn to dusk at hard manual labor. She's finding out that, well, you know, I could get away with this in the United States, but I can't get away with it here because of who I am. They don't care who you are. She's going to serve her time. She's got a 19-year stretch ahead of her. I think it's just now starting to sink in. Yes, Curtis.
And the Russians have a very long history of not caring
Yeah.
who you were. And that goes plumb back into the days of the Tsars.
Yeah. Well, that's what Johann said. Maybe it hasn't totally sunk in yet until she's been there a few days and finds out what the routine's going to be and that it wasn't as easy as she thought it was going to be. Verse 16, you will be profaned in yourself in the sight of the nations, then you will know that I am Yahweh. You shall take your inheritance in yourself in the sight of the heathen. No longer be the inheritance of Yahweh, but their own. Meaning, in other words, before Yahweh is going to be there to protect them and to keep them, healthy and all. Now, they're on their own. And not have Yahweh to be their portion and their inheritance, but themselves. It's going to be now you're going to have to rely on yourself. That's what she's going to find out. She's going to have to rely on herself. And a poor portion, an inheritance that must be, being in captivity, poverty, and distress, enjoying neither their civil nor religious liberties as heretofore, it would be now manifest to the heathens that they were forsaken of Elohim and left to themselves. Some render it, and you shall be profaned or polluted in yourself, shall be known to be so to yourself, as well as appear so to others. The Targum says, I will be sanctified in you before the people. Means he followed through in his judgment. And you shall know that I am Yahweh, able to do what I say, faithful to my word, omnipotent, omnipresent, and omnipotent. And this you shall not only know, but own and acknowledge when these calamities take place and have their effect. Verse 17, Yahweh's word came to me, saying, Son of man, the house of Israel has become dross to me. All of them are brass, tin, iron, and lead in the middle of the furnace. They are the dross of silver, that which is, I guess you should say, the impurities of silver. Son of man, commentary, the house of Israel is to me become dross, vile, despicable, useless, and unprofitable, to which the wicked of the earth are compared. You can also look this up in Psalms 119:18. You reject all those who stray from your statutes, for their deceit is in vain. Verse 119 of 119, you put away all the wicked of the earth like dross. Therefore I love your testimonies. This is the writer of Psalms who's talking about how Yahweh did follow through. And another about the commentary. Here, Yahweh's professing people, those that profess Yahweh, they differing nothing from them being sadly degenerate. Formerly they were as silver, and so they might be reckoned among themselves. But to Yahweh, who is omniscient, the searcher of the hearts and reins, who saw all their actions and knew the spring of them. In his sight they were as dross. All are brass, tin. Boy, I'm getting tongue-tied. Iron and lead in the midst of the furnace, or crucible, where they are put together in order to be set in the furnace and melted down. It is not unusual to put so many different metals together for melting, but separately. But here it seems to intend a mixture of them all together, and so the Targum and the Septuagint render it, all they as brass and are mixed. Several metals of the baser sort are here mentioned, by gradation from the better to the worse, tin not being so good as brass, iron of less value than either, and lead than any of them. Some think the different characters of the people are here described: impotent persons by brass, hypocrites by tin, cruel and savage ones by iron, and such as were sottish or stupid by lead, or as others covetous ones. They are even the dross of silver. Once they were like silver, precious and valuable, while they retained the true religion and the worship of Elohim, and behaved agreeably to their character in the performance of all good works, and were in outward flourishing circumstances, but now degenerate from the pure worship of Elohim, and sunk into idolatry and wickedness, and become poor and miserable. Therefore, verse 19, thus says Adonai Yahweh, because you have all become dross, there, behold, I will gather you into the middle of Jerusalem. Because you are all become dross, kings, princes, nobles, prophets, priests, as well as the common people. The apostasy was general in city and country, scarcely any exceptions to be made. Therefore will I gather into the midst of Jerusalem from the several parts of the country, thinking they should be safe there, when the design of Elohim by his providence was the destruction of them in it. It had another fulfillment other than this one, and that was in 70 A.D., when all the people came to Jerusalem for what? Passover in the days of unleavens. They had to be in Jerusalem, according to what the law required. That brought them all together, no matter who they were. They came to Jerusalem. Then they were closed in, and then they were slaughtered. Verse 19, therefore thus says Adonai Yahweh, because you have become dross, therefore behold, I will gather into the middle of Jerusalem. Verse 20, as they gather silver, brass, iron, lead, and tin into the middle of the furnace, to blow the fire on it, to melt it, so I will gather you in my anger and in my wrath, and I will lay you there and melt you. Silver is here mentioned to note that those who were truly good should suffer in this calamity and be tried and purified by it, meaning some of those were on the edge. And by going through this trial, they actually come out as purified silver on the other side, whereas others came out as dross. Verse 21, yes, I will gather you and blow on you fire with my wrath, and you will be melted in the middle of it. Verse 22, as silver is melted in the middle of the furnace, so you will be melted in the middle of it, Jerusalem. And you will know that I, Yahweh, have poured out my wrath on you. In 70 A.D., Yahweh gathered them in the middle of Jerusalem and carried out his sentence. Yahweh's word came to me, saying, Son of man, tell her, you are a land that is not cleansed nor rained on in the day of indignation. You are not cleansed from filthiness by the fire of divine judgments, or reformed by sins by the instructions, cautions, and exhortations of the prophets. None of these things had any effect on her to make her wiser and better. No matter how bad things got, people just did not think it was that bad, or that they were that bad. It's always somebody else that was worse than they were. A land not cleansed it is, and good works are not done in it to protect it in the day of cursing, nor rained upon in the day of indignation, no cooling shower to quench the fire of divine wrath, nothing to avert or stop the judgments of Yahweh, no refreshment and comfort from the doctrines of the prophets, which fell like rain. It is a judgment upon the people to have no rain, either in a temporal or spiritual sense. In the Talmud, this text is brought to prove that the flood did not come from the land of Israel. I don't know, okay. Zechariah 14:16. It will happen that everyone who is left of all the nations that come against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of armies, and to keep the Feast of Tents, or Sukkot, or Tabernacles, whatever how you want to call it. Verse 17, it will be that whoever of all the families of the earth doesn't go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of armies, on them there will be no rain. If the family of Egypt doesn't go up and doesn't come, neither will it rain on them. This will be the plague with which Yahweh will strike the nations that don't go up to keep the feast of Sukkot. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that don't go up to keep the Feast of Tents. Ezekiel 22:25. There is a conspiracy of her prophets within it, like a roaring lion raving the prey. They have devoured souls. They take treasure and precious things. They have made many widows within it. Not of the prophets, he talks about here, is not of the prophets of Yahweh, but of her prophets, such as were agreeable to her, the false prophets. The Targum reads, a company of scribes, the interpreters of the law. These entered into a confederacy together against the true prophets and agreed to prophesy the same things to flatter the people with peace and prosperity when sudden destruction was at hand. Like a roaring lion ravening the prey that roars when hungry and while it is tearing the prey in pieces, so these false prophets thundered out their menaces against the true prophets. And those that adhered to them, clamoring against them as enemies to the state, and threatening them with accusations to it, and carrying on a judicial process against them. They have devoured souls, persecuted men to death, that would not give credit to their prophecies, and destroyed the souls that did with their false doctrines and prophecies. They have taken the treasure and precious things of those that they destroyed, or of others, for prophesying smooth things to them, filthy lucre being the principal thing that they had in view. They have made their many widows in the midst thereof, by persecuting their husbands to death for not believing their prophecies, or by proceeding to hold out the siege under a notion of deliverance, whereby the lives of many were lost by the sword, famine, pestilence, to those to whose death they might be said to be necessary. In 70 A.D., more people lost their life because they didn't surrender. The Romans offered them the chance to surrender. But see, the thing was, those that were inside the walls did not want them to surrender. So they slaughtered them. Their own people slaughtered them. Most of the slaughtering that took place originally was them fighting each other over who was to be the high priest. All this is going on while they're surrounded by this army. So that by the time that the army breaks through, I mean, they're just, as the saying goes, sitting ducks. Because all the fighting has already been done. Most of the men that would defend have already been killed. And then the others just, bloodlust came in and finished them off, including all of the Levites. It says here, verse 26, her priests have done violence to my law. How do they do violence? By their interpretation. And have profaned my holy things. They have made no distinction between the holy and the common. Neither have they caused men to discern between the clean and the unclean, and have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths. Notice it comes back to Sabbaths and how they were kept. So I am profaned among them. Commentary, her priests have violated my law or forced it. They have gave a wrong explanation of it, made it speak what it should not. They wrested the sense and meaning of it and did taught things contrary to it. They broke it themselves, who should have instructed others in it and exhorted them to have kept it and encouraged them by their own example. I've been standing up here too long. Y'all starting to get kind of wiggly out there. And have profaned my holy things, which were only to be offered and eaten by holy persons. They made them common to others who should not have ate of them. Neither have they showed any difference between the clean and unclean. They did not show the people, as was the duty of their office, what was clean or unclean for sacrifice, what was clean or allowed to be eaten, and what was unclean or forbidden to be eaten, nor who were clean and who were unclean persons for conversation, who were to be kept company with, and who not.
Let's stop it. Let's end it.
All right.
Oh.